Everyone thought the golden boy was obsessed with me. They were wrong. He was trying to save my life. By the time the security officers unlocked Ethan Carter's gym locker, the rumors had already spread through every hallway, every group chat, and every lunch table at Westbrook High. The whispers moved faster than the morning bell. Stalker. Freak. Liar. Nobody bothered asking questions because everyone believed they already knew the answers. I stood frozen at the edge of the basketball court while hundreds of students stared at Ethan as if they had never admired him before. Just yesterday, he had been the face of the school, captain of the varsity team, straight-A student, volunteer at every charity event, the guy teachers trusted and parents wished their sons could become. Now every camera phone pointed in his direction while he refused to defend himself. His jaw stayed tight. His shoulders never slumped. He simply looked at me with an expression I still couldn't understand. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. If anything, it looked like regret. Then one of the officers carried out a cardboard storage box from his locker. A heavy silence swept across the gym. Someone gasped. Another student laughed nervously. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the coach asking everyone to step back. Inside the box were photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Every single one showed me. Me leaving chemistry class. Me reading alone beneath the oak tree near the football field. Me carrying groceries with my mom outside the local supermarket. Me drinking coffee at the small cafe 2 blocks from school every Saturday morning. Some pictures were old enough that my hair was shorter. Others had been taken only days ago. My stomach dropped. I had never seen any of them before. The entire gym exploded into shocked voices. I wanted to believe there had to be some mistake. There had to be another explanation. But when I looked at Ethan again, he didn't deny the pictures belonged to him. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to hide the truth. Instead, he quietly said my name. Noah. Just that. Nothing else. It should have made me furious. Instead, it made something inside me ache in a way I couldn't explain. Because despite everything sitting inside that box, despite every terrified thought racing through my head, there was something missing from Ethan's expression. Guilt. I expected guilt. I found sadness instead. Before anyone could ask another question, the principal instructed everyone back to class. The crowd slowly scattered, carrying the story with them like wildfire chasing dry leaves. I remained rooted to the polished hardwood floor long after everyone else had left. My hands trembled as I replayed every strange moment from the past 3 months. Every unexpected appearance. Every coincidence. Every time Ethan somehow showed up exactly when I needed help. At the time I called it luck. Standing there alone in the echoing gym, surrounded by fading sneaker marks and forgotten cheers, I realized luck had probably never been part of the story at all. I barely remembered walking out of the gym that afternoon. The voices around me blurred into one endless wave of whispers, every conversation ending the same way whenever I came close. People looked at me with sympathy, curiosity, or excitement, as though I had suddenly become the most interesting person in school. I wanted none of it. My phone vibrated every few seconds with messages I refused to open. Friends asked if I was all right. Classmates wanted details. Some even claimed they had always suspected something was strange about Ethan. The funny thing was, I had never suspected him at all. If anything, I had spent the last 3 years assuming he barely noticed I existed. Ethan lived in a different universe. He was surrounded by teammates, student council members, teachers who praised him, and younger students who copied everything from his haircut to his sneakers. I was the quiet guy who preferred the library over pep rallies and spent Saturday mornings working part-time at a neighborhood coffee shop. Our lives crossed only because we attended the same school. At least that was what I had always believed. As I unlocked my car after classes ended, another memory surfaced without warning. 3 months earlier, my old sedan had refused to start after school. I remembered sitting behind the steering wheel, frustrated and completely alone in the nearly empty parking lot. Before I could even search for roadside assistance, Ethan had appeared carrying a portable jump starter. He smiled politely, connected the cables, waited until my engine came back to life, wished me a safe drive, and walked away before I could ask how he had known I needed help. At the time I called it coincidence. Now it felt different. I drove home through familiar streets, passing the grocery store, the public park, and the small bookstore where I sometimes spent rainy afternoons. Every place suddenly carried a question I had never asked before. Had Ethan really been there all those times, or was my imagination filling in blanks that did not exist? The uncertainty bothered me more than any rumor ever could. After dinner, I opened my laptop, intending to finish a history assignment, but instead I searched through months of old photos on my phone. Hidden among pictures of birthdays, sunsets, and homework reminders were tiny moments I had almost forgotten. Ethan standing across the football field during homecoming. Ethan leaving the grocery store as I arrived. Ethan walking out of the same coffee shop one Saturday morning, carrying a cup he never even drank because he handed it to an elderly customer whose hands were full. Every image looked ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a pattern that refused to leave my mind. Just as I was about to shut my laptop, an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. There was no greeting when I answered, only a calm voice that I recognized instantly. "Noah," Ethan said quietly, "I know you have questions. I cannot explain everything over the phone, but there is one thing you need to know before you believe what everyone is saying. Those photographs were never meant to hurt you. They were evidence." Before I could ask what he meant, the call ended, leaving me staring at my dark screen while one impossible question echoed louder than all the rumors combined. Evidence of what? The next morning I arrived at school almost an hour early, hoping the empty hallways would give me enough silence to think. They did not. Rumors had a way of arriving before anyone else. By the time I reached my locker, someone had already taped a newspaper clipping from the student bulletin across the door. It did not mention my name, but everyone knew who the story was about. I pulled the paper down, folded it into the smallest square I could manage, and shoved it into my backpack. My first class felt endless. I could not remember a single thing the teacher said because one sentence kept repeating in my mind. Those photographs were evidence. Evidence of what? At lunch, I skipped the crowded cafeteria and headed toward the library, but halfway across campus I noticed someone sitting alone on the stone bench outside the administration building. Ethan. His varsity jacket was gone, replaced by a plain gray sweatshirt. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like the most admired student in school and more like an ordinary teenager carrying the weight of everyone else's opinions. He noticed me immediately but stayed where he was, giving me enough space to decide whether I wanted to leave. I almost did. Instead, I walked over. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the football field, and somewhere nearby the marching band practiced the same melody again and again. Finally, I broke the silence. "You said those pictures were evidence." Ethan nodded once. "They were." "Then explain." He reached into his backpack slowly and removed a thin blue folder. "Before you open this, I need you to know something. I should have told you months ago. I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet. Instead, I made everything look worse." I accepted the folder with shaking hands. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, and reports made to the school administration. Several anonymous messages described someone following me after classes, photographing my car, and leaving handwritten notes that disappeared before I ever saw them. My name appeared on every page. So did dates that matched moments I remembered feeling strangely uneasy without knowing why. I looked up at Ethan. Why did nobody tell me? Because every report stopped before there was enough proof to identify who was responsible, he answered quietly. The administration believed the messages might have been a prank. I did not. I turned another page and froze. There was a campus map marked with circles showing places where different witnesses had reported seeing the same unidentified person watching the student parking lot, the coffee shop across the street, and the public library where I studied every Thursday evening. None of the circles pointed toward Ethan. They pointed somewhere else entirely. I started keeping records because I thought if enough details matched, someone would finally take it seriously, he said. The photographs were never about keeping track of you. They were about documenting where you were after each anonymous report so investigators could compare timelines. I stared at the folder, my heartbeat slowing for the first time since everything had begun. The story everyone believed suddenly felt incomplete. And if Ethan had been telling the truth from the beginning, then the biggest mystery was no longer why he had those photographs. It was who had forced him to start collecting them in the first place. The blue folder stayed on my desk long after Ethan walked away. I read every page again that evening, hoping I would discover a detail I had missed the first time. Instead, I found something even stranger. Every report ended the same way. No confirmed suspect. No direct evidence. No action taken. Whoever had been leaving anonymous messages knew exactly how to remain invisible. I leaned back in my chair and stared through my bedroom window as the last light faded across the neighborhood. The entire situation felt unreal. 24 hours earlier, I believed Ethan had been hiding an unhealthy secret. Now I was wondering whether he had been carrying a burden that nobody else had wanted to acknowledge. The next morning, the atmosphere at school had shifted again. Students were no longer whispering only about Ethan. They were watching me too. Conversations stopped whenever I passed. A few classmates offered awkward smiles. Others avoided eye contact completely. I understood why. Nobody knew what to believe anymore. During third period, my guidance counselor asked if I would stop by her office after class. Her expression was kind, but unusually serious. When I arrived, she closed the door and folded her hands on the desk. She explained that the administration had reopened the reports after reviewing new information. She could not discuss details, but she encouraged me to let an adult know immediately if I noticed anything unusual, no matter how small it seemed. I nodded, although I was not sure what counted as unusual anymore. On my way home, I decided to take my normal route through Maple Park instead of driving straight back. The familiar walking trail usually helped clear my thoughts. Children played on the swings while families walked their dogs beneath rows of tall maple trees. Everything looked perfectly ordinary until my phone vibrated. One new message. No sender. No number. Just a sentence. Do not trust everything you read. My pulse quickened. Before I could react, the message disappeared from the screen as if it had never existed. I checked my recent notifications twice. Nothing. Maybe it had been a software glitch. Maybe I had imagined it. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to leave. As I continued walking, I noticed Ethan standing across the street outside a small bookstore. He had not seen me yet. He was speaking with a middle-aged woman wearing an employee identification badge from the public library. She handed him a manila envelope, said something quietly, and pointed toward the park entrance before returning inside. Ethan looked down at the envelope but did not open it. Instead, he glanced toward the trail, and his eyes met mine. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the street at a normal pace, stopping several feet away so I would not feel cornered. I was hoping I would find you before someone else did, he said calmly. He held out the unopened envelope. This belongs to you. It was delivered to the library this afternoon with your name on it. I accepted it carefully. There was no return address. Only my name written across the front in neat block letters. The paper felt surprisingly heavy, and for reasons I could not explain, I hesitated before breaking the seal, suddenly afraid that whatever waited inside might answer one question while creating a dozen more. I looked at the envelope for what felt like an entire minute before finally sliding one finger beneath the seal. The paper opened with a soft tear that somehow sounded louder than the traffic passing behind us. Inside was a single folded sheet and a small flash drive taped carefully to the corner. My name appeared at the top of the page in neat printed letters. There was no signature, no greeting, just one sentence. If you want the truth, stop asking the wrong person. My heartbeat quickened. I turned the page over, expecting more, but it was completely blank. Ethan remained several feet away, watching my reaction without trying to take the paper or explain it for me. You have never seen this before? I asked. He shook his head immediately. The librarian called because someone left it at the front desk and insisted it had to reach you today. She recognized my name from everything happening at school and thought I should make sure you received it. I looked down at the flash drive resting in my palm. It was an ordinary black drive, the kind anyone could buy for a few dollars. Yet it suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Do you think it is safe? I asked quietly. Ethan answered honestly. I do not know. That answer surprised me more than anything else. Over the past few days, I had started expecting him to always have a plan, always know the next step. Instead, he looked just as uncertain as I felt. We walked together to the public library because neither of us wanted to plug an unknown device into a personal computer. The librarian escorted us into a small office where an older desktop computer sat disconnected from every network. She explained that local police had already suggested using isolated machines whenever suspicious digital files appeared. My hands trembled as I inserted the drive. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared on the screen. Inside were photographs of familiar places around town. The football stadium, the coffee shop where I worked on weekends, the community library, Maple Park. Each image included a date and timestamp. None of them showed me. Instead, every picture captured the same dark blue sedan parked nearby. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor without touching it. "I have seen that car before," he whispered. "Near the student parking lot." I clicked another file. This time it contained scanned receipts from different locations across town. Every receipt matched the dates of the anonymous reports inside Ethan's folder. The final document was only one sentence long. "The driver is not who you think." Before either of us could say another word, footsteps hurried down the hallway outside the office. The librarian opened the door with a concerned expression. "I just received a call from the principal," she said. "He needs both of you back at school immediately." My stomach tightened. "Why?" She hesitated for the first time since we had met. "Someone came forward this afternoon and claimed they know who has been sending the anonymous messages." Ethan and I exchanged a silent glance. For the first time since this strange chain of events had begun, we were no longer standing on opposite sides of the mystery. We were searching for the same answer together, and somehow that realization felt even more unsettling than the envelope itself. The drive back to school felt longer than it actually was. Neither Ethan nor I said much. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable, but it was filled with questions that neither of us could answer yet. Every traffic light seemed to last forever, and every passing minute made me wonder who had finally decided to come forward. When we reached the administration building, the front office looked unusually busy. Teachers moved quietly through the hallway, speaking in low voices while the principal stood outside his office with the guidance counselor. He greeted us with a tired smile that did little to hide the concern in his eyes. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "We have been reviewing information all afternoon." He invited us into the conference room, where several folders were spread across the table. There was only one empty chair between Ethan and me. I hesitated for a second before sitting down. The principal folded his hands and took a slow breath. Earlier today, a former student contacted the school after seeing the news about Ethan. He believed something from 2 years ago might finally make sense. My attention sharpened immediately. 2 years ago was before Ethan and I had ever spoken. The principal opened a folder and slid a faded incident report across the table. It described several anonymous letters that had been mailed to the school concerning different students. At the time, every letter had contained vague warnings that could never be verified, so the investigation eventually stopped. One detail caught my attention. The handwriting on the envelopes matched the writing on the envelope I had opened only an hour earlier. The former student recognized it from an old photograph, the guidance counselor explained. He remembered seeing someone writing similar notes in the library after school. My pulse quickened. Did he identify the person? The principal slowly shook his head. No, he only remembered one unusual habit. The writer always used dark blue stationery instead of plain white paper. Ethan and I exchanged another glance. The anonymous envelope from the library had been dark blue. The principal then handed us a sealed evidence bag containing several copies of the old letters. Every page carried the same careful block printing. Every sentence sounded less like a threat and more like a warning that nobody had taken seriously. As I compared them to the message from the flash drive, one realization settled quietly into my mind. Whoever had been sending these messages had been active for years, long before Ethan ever started collecting timelines and reports. That meant one thing. He had never created the mystery. He had walked into it just like I had. The meeting ended with a simple request. Until the investigation was complete, we were both asked to report anything unusual immediately and avoid handling anonymous messages alone. As Ethan and I stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight, he finally spoke. "There is something I never told you because I thought it would sound impossible." I looked at him carefully. After everything that has happened this week, I think impossible stopped existing. He managed the smallest smile I had ever seen from him. Then he reached into his backpack and removed a folded photograph that looked much older than the others. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded by time. He handed it to me without saying a word. I stared at the image, and my breath caught. It showed 2 boys at a community charity event nearly 8 years earlier. One of them was me. The other was Ethan, standing side by side, smiling at the camera, years before either of us remembered meeting. The photograph refused to leave my mind. I studied every faded detail as though the paper might suddenly explain the missing years between that smiling picture and the complicated reality standing beside me. I recognized the blue volunteer shirt I used to wear at the annual community charity fair. My mother had insisted I help hand out bottled water and organize donated books. I remembered almost nothing else about that day. Ethan leaned against the brick wall outside the school, giving me all the time I needed. Finally, I looked up. I do not remember this. He nodded gently, almost as though he had expected that answer. I did not think you would. We walked slowly toward the nearly empty football field while the late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the grass. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan broke the silence. You probably helped hundreds of people that summer. I was only one of them. I frowned. Helped you how? He took a deep breath before answering. I got separated from my parents during the event. I was 8 years old. I panicked. You found me crying near the parking lot, stayed with me, and helped one of the volunteers locate my family. I searched my memory again. Small fragments surfaced like pieces of a puzzle buried beneath years of ordinary life. A little boy wearing a baseball cap. A melted ice cream cone. Someone thanking me before driving away. Nothing more. It was only 15 minutes, I whispered. Ethan smiled softly. Maybe for you. His eyes drifted toward the empty bleachers. For me, it felt much longer. I had never been that scared before. I looked down at the photograph once more. You remembered all of that? Every bit of it. His answer came without hesitation. When we started high school, I recognized you on the first day. You had changed, but your smile had not. I laughed quietly in disbelief, and I walked right past you without realizing we had ever met. You had no reason to remember. There was no disappointment in his voice, only simple acceptance. I almost introduced myself several times. Then life kept getting busy, and it always felt like the wrong moment. The breeze carried the distant sound of students leaving campus. Everything around us suddenly felt calmer than it had in days. For the first time since this strange mystery began, Ethan was no longer the impossible image everyone else had created. He was simply another person carrying memories that I no longer shared. So when those anonymous reports started appearing, I asked carefully, "You decided to help because of that day?" Ethan looked directly at me. At first, yes. I could not ignore something that felt wrong. He paused before continuing. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about paying back an old kindness. My heartbeat stumbled. He quickly added, "I mean that I wanted to know you as the person you had become. Not because I felt I owed you anything. Because I genuinely respected you." His honesty caught me completely off guard. There were no dramatic declarations. No impossible promises. Just quiet sincerity that somehow carried more weight than anything else he could have said. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. This time the message stayed on the screen. There was no number attached, only a single sentence that made both of us stop walking at the exact same moment. "You finally found the beginning. Now find out why someone wanted you to forget it." The message remained on my screen long after the display dimmed. I read the sentence over and over until the words almost stopped looking like words. Find out why someone wanted you to forget it. Ethan stood beside me without asking to see my phone. That simple choice mattered more than he probably realized. A week earlier, I would have expected him to demand answers. Instead, he waited until I was ready to speak. "It happened again," I said quietly, handing him the phone. He read the message once and returned it immediately. "It is becoming more personal." I nodded. Almost like whoever is sending these messages knows exactly where we are. We both looked around the nearly empty football field. The parking lot was beginning to fill with parents picking up younger siblings from after-school activities. Coaches gathered equipment while the maintenance crew prepared the stadium lights for the evening practice. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, yet the ordinary no longer felt convincing. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the old photograph. 8 years had disappeared from my memory, but not from Ethan's. I wondered how many times our paths had crossed without me noticing. That night, I searched through boxes in the hallway closet until I found an old plastic container filled with childhood keepsakes. Report cards, birthday cards, faded ribbons from elementary school science fairs, and dozens of photographs spilled across my bedroom floor. My mother walked past the open door and smiled. "I have not seen those in years." I held up the photograph Ethan had given me. "Do you remember this event?" She looked at it for only a second before her expression changed. "Of course I do. That was the summer community fundraiser." She sat beside me and gently took the picture into her hands. "You insisted on helping every child who looked lost. Your father joked that you were running your own information booth. I laughed softly. Did I know Ethan back then? She studied the photograph again before nodding. Not really. You only met for a few minutes. His parents thanked you because he became separated from them. She paused thoughtfully. I remember thinking what a polite little boy he was. A strange warmth settled in my chest. Ethan had remembered a brief act of kindness for almost a decade, while I had completely forgotten it. Before I could ask another question, my mother reached into the storage box and removed a small scrapbook I had never noticed before. Tucked inside one of the pages was a folded newspaper clipping from the local community section. The article featured photographs from the fundraiser. I looked closer and froze. In the background of one picture, far behind the volunteers, stood the same dark blue sedan that appeared in every image from the anonymous flash drive. My mother frowned. What is wrong? I pointed at the car with an unsteady finger. Nothing. I answered automatically, although my mind was racing. The sedan had been there 8 years ago, long before the anonymous messages, long before high school, long before anyone could claim this mystery had only recently begun. I carefully removed the newspaper clipping and slipped it into a protective folder. Whatever connected that forgotten summer day to everything happening now had been hidden in plain sight all along, waiting for someone to notice the smallest detail. The next morning I met Ethan before classes began, carrying the old newspaper clipping inside a clear plastic folder. The moment he saw the photograph of the dark blue sedan in the background, he stopped walking. Neither of us spoke until we reached the guidance counselor's office. Together we placed the clipping beside the recent photographs from the flash drive, and for the first time the timeline stretched across nearly a decade instead of only a few months. The guidance counselor quietly thanked us before explaining that local authorities had already begun comparing the newly discovered images with archive community event records. It was a slow process, but the additional evidence finally provided a direction that had never existed before. As we stepped back into the hallway, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because every question had been answered, but because the burden no longer rested on one person's shoulders. The truth was becoming something shared instead of something hidden. Over the following weeks, the rumors gradually faded. Students found new stories to talk about. Basketball season returned. Teachers focused on exams. Life slowly resembled normal again. Ethan's reputation recovered little by little after the school acknowledged that he had repeatedly reported concerns through proper channels rather than hiding them. Some classmates apologized. Others simply moved on without saying anything. Ethan accepted both reactions with the same quiet grace that had always defined him. One Friday afternoon, we volunteered together at the annual community fundraiser, the very event where our paths had first crossed years earlier. Children laughed as they carried paper bags filled with donated books. Parents thanked volunteers for organizing games. Standing beneath the same row of maple trees from the old photograph, I realized how strangely life could circle back to where it began. I glanced at Ethan and smiled. You know, if you had introduced yourself on the first day of high school, this entire story might have been very different. He laughed softly. I have thought about that more times than I can count. So why did you never do it? He looked toward the families gathered across the park before answering. Because I wanted you to know me for who I was, not because you felt obligated to remember a favor from childhood. His answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. It was simple, honest, and completely consistent with the person I had finally come to know. As the afternoon came to a close, volunteers gathered for a group photograph. Someone handed me the camera for the first picture, then asked another volunteer to take one with everyone included. Without thinking, I walked over and stood beside Ethan. Just before the shutter clicked, I reached over and gently took his hand. It was a small gesture, natural enough that only the people closest to us even noticed. Ethan looked at me with quiet surprise, then smiled in the same warm, unguarded way I had seen only a handful of times before. In that moment, I understood something the mystery had been trying to teach me all along. Trust is not built by dramatic promises or perfect first impressions. It grows through honesty, patience, and the courage to tell the truth even when it is misunderstood. Months later, the investigation finally identified the source of the anonymous messages through evidence gathered from multiple reports over many years, bringing the long uncertainty to a peaceful close. The answers mattered, but they were no longer the most important part of the story. What stayed with me was the unexpected friendship that had grown into something deeper through kindness freely given. Years remembered by one heart until they could finally be shared by two, proving that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can quietly change the course of two lives without either person realizing it until much later.